The needle pierced through the torn flesh, and Lady Eleanor Grey felt him flinch beneath her steady hands. Blood seeped through the white linen cloth she had wrapped around his shoulder moments before. The Earl of Ashworth sat rigid on the wooden chair in his study, his jaw clenched tight. His dark eyes watched her face as she worked. She had seen many things in her 26 years, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Nothing had prepared her for the way his voice would crack when he spoke. "My wife never touched me like this," he gasped. Eleanor's hands stilled. The bandage hung loose between her fingers. She had been married to the Earl for 3 months now. 3 months of silence and separate chambers. 3 months of wondering why he had chosen her, the unwanted daughter, the one her family called plain and useless. She swallowed hard and continued wrapping the clean linen around his wounded shoulder. "She couldn't bear to look at me," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Not after our son died." Eleanor's heart twisted in her chest. She tied off the bandage with gentle fingers. Her touch was soft, careful not to cause more pain. The Earl had fallen from his horse that afternoon. The animal had spooked near the old stone bridge. He had crashed into the rocks below. When the servants carried him inside, he had refused the doctor. He had looked at Eleanor instead, his eyes holding something she couldn't name. "You should rest, my lord," she said quietly. "Edward," he replied. "My name is Edward." She had never called him by his first name. No one had asked her to. In her family's house, she had been nothing more than a burden. Her mother had died giving birth to her. Her father blamed her for that loss. Her stepmother treated her like a servant. Her stepsisters mocked her plain brown hair and simple features. They called her the ugly duckling. They said no man would ever want her. But the Earl of Ashworth had wanted her, or at least he had needed a wife. His first wife had been dead for 2 years. Society whispered that he needed an heir. Eleanor's father had been desperate for a connection to nobility. The Earl had been desperate for something else, something Eleanor still didn't understand. She stepped back from him now. Her hands were stained with his blood. She folded them in front of her dress, trying to hide the trembling. The study felt too warm. The fire in the hearth crackled and popped. Rain pattered against the tall windows. Outside, the gardens of Ashworth Manor stretched into darkness. "Thank you," Edward said. His dark hair fell across his forehead. There were lines around his eyes, marks of grief and sleepless nights. He was 32 years old, but sometimes looked much older. Other times, like now, he looked almost boyish in his vulnerability. "It is my duty, my lord." "Edward," he insisted again. She nodded, but said nothing. Duty was all she knew. Duty had brought her here. Duty kept her in this big cold house where servants whispered about the tragic Earl and his unfortunate second wife. They pitied her. She knew. They thought he would never love her. They thought she would live in the shadow of the First Lady Ashworth forever. Eleanor had thought so too, until tonight, until those words. "My wife never touched me like this." She carried those words with her as she left the study. She carried them up the grand staircase to her chambers. She washed the blood from her hands in the porcelain basin. The water turned pink, then red, then clear again. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror above the washstand. Plain brown eyes, unremarkable features. She had stopped looking for beauty in that reflection years ago. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, for the first time since coming to Ashworth Manor, she had felt needed. Not tolerated. Not pitied. Needed. Eleanor had grown up in a house where no one needed her. Her father, Lord Pemberton, was a baron with mounting debts and failing investments. Her stepmother, Lady Pemberton, had 2 daughters from her first marriage. Catherine and Sophia were beautiful girls with golden curls and bright smiles. They had suitors lining up at the door. They had dowries and prospects. Eleanor had nothing but her father's name and a small inheritance from her mother. That inheritance had interested the Earl, or so Eleanor had believed. Her father had arranged the marriage quickly, too quickly for questions. Eleanor had been given 1 week to prepare. 1 week to say goodbye to the only home she had ever known. Not that anyone had been sad to see her go. "Finally, you'll be of some use," her stepmother had said the night before the wedding. "At least the Earl's money will help your father. That's more than you've ever done for this family." Catherine and Sophia had laughed. They always laughed at her. They had made her childhood miserable with their casual cruelty. They had hidden her books and torn her dresses. They had told the servants not to help her. They had made sure Eleanor knew her place. Below them. Always below them. The wedding had been a small affair. Just family and a few witnesses. The Earl had been polite but distant. He had said his vows in a flat voice. He had kissed her hand, not her lips. Then they had ridden to Ashworth Manor in separate carriages. Eleanor had travelled with her lady's maid, a kind girl named Hannah who had been assigned to her. The Earl had ridden alone. That first night at the manor, Eleanor had waited in her chambers. She had worn the white nightgown. Hannah had laid out for her. She had sat on the edge of the enormous bed, her heart pounding. She knew what was expected on a wedding night. She had prepared herself for duty, for discomfort, perhaps for pain. But Edward had never come. She had waited until dawn. Then Hannah had arrived with breakfast and a gentle smile. "His lordship thought you might wish to rest after the journey," the maid had said. But Eleanor had seen the pity in Hannah's eyes. She had understood then. The Earl didn't want her. He had married her for convenience, nothing more. The days had turned to weeks. The weeks had turned to months. Edward was courteous when they met at dinner. He asked about her day. He made sure she had everything she needed. But he never touched her. He never came to her chambers. He barely looked at her for more than a moment. Eleanor had tried to be useful. She had taken over the household management from the aging housekeeper, Mrs. Roberts. She had organized the servants and planned the meals. She had walked the gardens and learned the names of every flower. She had read in the library and played the pianoforte when she thought no one could hear. She had tried to make herself invisible and indispensable at the same time. But tonight had changed something. Tonight, Edward had needed her. His hands had shaken when she had cleaned the wound. His breath had hitched when she had pressed the cloth against the bleeding cut. And he had spoken about his first wife. He had opened a door that Eleanor had thought would remain forever closed. She climbed into bed, but couldn't sleep. The rain continued outside her window. She thought about Edward sitting alone in his study. She wondered if his shoulder hurt. She wondered if he was thinking about her. She wondered if those words had meant what she desperately hoped they meant. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find Hannah bustling around her room. The maid pulled back the heavy curtains, letting pale sunlight stream in. The rain had stopped. The garden sparkled with leftover drops. "His lordship asked for you to join him for breakfast," Hannah said. There was something bright in her voice, something excited. Eleanor's stomach fluttered. Edward usually took breakfast alone in his study. She dressed quickly, choosing a simple blue morning dress. Hannah arranged her hair in a soft knot at the base of her neck. Eleanor looked at herself in the mirror and tried not to hope too much. The breakfast room was on the east side of the manor. Windows overlooked the rose garden. Edward stood when she entered. He wore a dark coat and a crisp white shirt. His left arm was stiff, but he moved with his usual grace. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Something new. Lady Ashworth, he said formally. But then he added, Eleanor. It was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it in his deep voice made her breath catch. My lord, she replied. Then, gathering courage, Edward, a small smile touched his lips. It transformed his face. Eleanor had never seen him smile before. Not really. She had seen polite expressions and brief nods. But this was different. This reached his eyes. They sat down. A footman served eggs and toast, and hot tea for a few moments. They ate in silence. But it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of before. It was something softer, something almost peaceful. How is your shoulder? Eleanor asked. Better, thanks to your excellent care. He set down his teacup. I must apologize for last night. I said things that were perhaps too personal. No, Eleanor said quickly. Please don't apologize. He studied her face, really studied it. Eleanor felt exposed under his gaze, but she didn't look away. She had spent too many years looking away, hiding, making herself small. Something about last night had changed her too. She had felt capable. She had felt strong. My first wife, Catherine, was very beautiful, Edward said slowly. Everyone said so. She was the diamond of her season. When I married her, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. Eleanor's chest tightened, but she kept listening. But beauty isn't enough, he continued. We were strangers who happened to share a name and a house. She wanted London and parties and society. I wanted peace and family. We were never truly happy. Then our son was born, and for a brief moment, I thought everything would be different. His voice broke. Eleanor reached across the table without thinking. Her hand covered his. His skin was warm. His fingers curled around hers. He lived for 3 days, Edward whispered. 3 perfect days. Then he was gone. And Catherine, she couldn't bear it. She couldn't bear me. She blamed herself, but I think she blamed me too. She died a year later. The doctor said it was a fever, but I knew better. She had stopped wanting to live. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. She squeezed his hand. I'm so sorry. I became a ghost in my own home, he said. I went through the motions of living, but I felt nothing, until society began pressuring me to remarry, until my solicitor said I needed an heir. I knew I had to try again, but I couldn't face another Catherine, another beautiful, unhappy woman who would look at me with disappointment. He lifted his eyes to hers. They were bright, with unshed tears. When your father approached me, I investigated your situation. I learned about how your family treated you. I learned that you were kind to the servants and gentle with animals. I learned that you read books on agriculture and kept careful household accounts. I learned that you were overlooked and undervalued, and I thought, perhaps we could have something real. Something built on respect instead of appearances. Eleanor couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. No one had ever said such things to her. No one had ever looked beyond what she wasn't to see what she was. But then I brought you here, Edward continued, and I realized I had no idea how to build that connection. I had failed so completely. With Catherine, I was terrified of failing again, so I kept my distance. I told myself I was being respectful, giving you time. But really, I was being a coward. You're not a coward, Eleanor said. Her voice was fierce. You've been hurt. That's different. He looked at their joined hands. Last night, when I fell, all I could think was that I didn't want to die without knowing you, really knowing you. And when you touched me, when you cared for me with such tenderness, Eleanor, my wife, never touched me like that. She never looked at me the way you did, like I mattered, like my pain mattered. A tear slid down Eleanor's cheek. You do matter. "So do you," he said intensely. "You matter more than you know. I've watched you these past 3 months. I've seen how you've transformed this house. The servants adore you. The gardens have never looked better. You play the pianoforte beautifully. Your laugh, on the rare occasions I've heard it, is the loveliest sound. You are not what your family told you. You are extraordinary." Eleanor pulled her hand back. She stood abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor. She walked to the window because she couldn't bear the intensity of his gaze. She had spent 26 years believing she was worthless. She couldn't simply stop believing it because of pretty words. "You don't have to say these things," she whispered. She heard him stand. She heard his footsteps crossing the room. Then he was behind her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Eleanor, look at me." She turned slowly. His face was inches from hers. She could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. She could see the scar on his chin from some childhood accident. She could see the man behind the title, behind the grief. "I'm saying these things because they're true," he said softly. "I'm saying them because I should have said them weeks ago. I'm saying them because last night when you touched me, something woke up inside me, something I thought had died with my son."
"What?"
Eleanor breathed. Hope. The word hung between them. Eleanor's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Edward lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His fingers brushed her cheek. The touch was feather-light, reverent. "I would like to know you," he said. "Not as strangers sharing a house, not as duty, but as partners, as friends, and perhaps, someday, as something more." "I would like that too," Eleanor whispered. His smile was bright enough to chase away every dark thought she'd ever had about herself. He stepped back, proper distance restored, but the air between them hummed with possibility. "Then let's start again," he said. "Good morning, Eleanor. My name is Edward Thornton, Earl of Ashworth. I am a widower with too many rooms and not enough laughter in my life. I enjoy riding, though apparently I need to work on staying in the saddle. I prefer the country to the city. I have a terrible habit of losing myself in my account books, and I would very much like to know you better." Eleanor felt laughter bubble up in her chest. Real laughter. It burst out of her, bright and unexpected. Edward's eyes widened, then he laughed too. The sound filled the breakfast room, chasing away the ghosts that had haunted them both. "Good morning, Edward," she said. "My name is Eleanor Grey, Countess of Ashworth. I am a second wife who feels like a first choice for the very first time. I enjoy reading, especially books on botany and estate management. I play the pianoforte, but only when I think no one is listening. I have a terrible habit of talking to flowers, and I would very much like to know you better too." From that morning, everything changed. Edward began taking breakfast with Eleanor every day. They would sit by the windows and talk about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, about the brother he had lost to war, about his dreams for the estate. She told him about the books she loved, about her mother, whom she barely remembered, about the small kindnesses that had kept her going through years of cruelty. They began walking the gardens together after breakfast. Edward would offer his arm, and Eleanor would take it. They would stroll between the rose bushes and along the gravel paths. He would point out the changes she had made, the improvements she had overseen. She would share her plans for the spring planting. Their conversations flowed easily now, like a stream that had finally found its course. One morning, as they walked, Edward asked about her family. Eleanor tensed. She had avoided the subject, afraid that speaking about them would bring their cruelty back into her new happy life. But Edward's expression was open and patient. So she told him about the mockery and the isolation. She told him about being called ugly and worthless. She told him about the tears she had cried into her pillow at night. Edward stopped walking. His face had gone dark with anger. "They were fools," he said fiercely. "Blind, cruel fools. They made me believe I was nothing," Eleanor admitted. "Some days I still believe it. Then I will spend every day proving them wrong," Edward said. He cupped her face in his hands. "You are beautiful, Eleanor, not in the obvious way that society celebrates, but in the way morning light catches in your hair, in the way your eyes soften when you look at a flower, in the way your whole face transforms when you smile. You are beautiful in your kindness and your strength. You are beautiful in the way that matters." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever called her beautiful. No one had ever looked at her the way Edward was looking at her now, like she was precious, like she was treasured. "I don't know how to believe that," she whispered. "Then let me believe it for both of us," he said. "Until you can believe it too." He kissed her forehead. It was the first kiss he had given her since their wedding day. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Eleanor closed her eyes and let herself feel it, let herself feel wanted. The days continued to unfold like the petals of the roses in the garden, slowly, beautifully. Eleanor found herself waking with anticipation instead of dread. She found herself listening for Edward's footsteps in the hall. She found herself caring about what dress she wore and how her hair looked. Not because she thought she could become beautiful, but because she wanted to please him. Edward seemed equally transformed. The servants noticed it first. Mrs. Roberts commented that his lordship smiled more. The footman said he was whistling as he walked through the halls. Even his steward, Miss Peters, remarked that the Earl seemed more engaged with estate business than he had been in years. Hannah noticed the change in Eleanor too. "You look happy, my lady," the maid said one evening as she brushed out Eleanor's hair. "You glow." Eleanor blushed. "Do I?" "Yes, my lady. And if I may be so bold, his lordship looks at you like the sun rises and sets with you." Eleanor met Hannah's eyes in the mirror. "He's been very kind." "It's more than kindness," Hannah said wisely. "I served the First Lady Ashworth. I saw how things were between them. This is different. This is real." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Hannah's words, about the way Edward looked at her, about the gentle touches that had become more frequent. His hand on her elbow as he helped her into the carriage, his fingers brushing hers as he passed her a book, the way he stood close enough that she could feel his warmth. She wanted more. The realization startled her. She wanted him to kiss her again. Really kiss her. She wanted to know what it felt like to be desired. She had spent so long believing no one would ever want her that way. But Edward's eyes held heat when he looked at her now, a heat that made her stomach flutter and her skin tingle. The next afternoon, they rode out to survey the tenant farms. Edward had asked if she wanted to come, and Eleanor had eagerly agreed. She loved seeing the estate, loved meeting the families who worked the land. They rode side by side, their horses moving in easy rhythm. At the first farm, they met the Thompsons. Mr. Thompson showed Edward the new irrigation system they were testing. Mrs. Thompson invited them in for tea. Eleanor sat with the Thompson children and admired their drawings. The youngest girl, maybe 5 years old, climbed into Eleanor's lap without hesitation. "You're pretty," the child said, touching Eleanor's face. Eleanor's throat tightened. "Thank you, sweetheart." When they left, Edward was quiet. They rode for several minutes before he spoke. "You're wonderful with children." "I always wanted a house full of them," Eleanor admitted. Then she blushed, realizing what she had said. What it implied. Edward reined in his horse. Eleanor stopped beside him. They were in the middle of a field, wildflowers blooming all around them. The sun was warm on Eleanor's shoulders. Edward's expression was serious. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. "What is it?" "When I married you, I told myself it was for practical reasons. I needed an heir. You needed security. But that was a lie, I told myself, because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of feeling again, of wanting again, of loving again." He dismounted and came to stand beside her horse. He reached up and lifted her down. His hands spanned her waist. He set her on her feet, but didn't let go. "Eleanor, I'm not afraid anymore." She looked up at him. "Edward, I'm falling in love with you," he said. "I think I've been falling since the night you touched me with such tenderness, since the morning you laughed in the breakfast room, since every moment we've spent together. You've brought light back into my life. You've made me want to be better. You've made me feel alive." Eleanor couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of his words, the truth in his eyes. "I don't expect you to feel the same," he continued. "I know I've given you no reason to love me. I've been distant and cold, but I'm asking for a chance, a real chance, to court you properly, to show you how much you mean to me." Eleanor kissed him. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his words. For a heartbeat he froze in surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close. The kiss deepened. It was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. This was heat and hunger and hope all tangled together. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Edward rested his forehead against hers. "Eleanor," he whispered. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said. "I think I've been falling since you said my name at breakfast, since you held my hand and told me I mattered, since you looked at me like I was worth looking at. Edward, you've made me feel like I'm finally home." He kissed her again, softer this time, sweeter, when he pulled back. His eyes were bright. "We should probably head back to the manor." "Why?" Eleanor teased. She felt brave and bold and beautiful. "Because if we stay here much longer, I'm going to forget that I'm supposed to be a gentleman," he said with a wry smile. Eleanor blushed but smiled back. They rode home slowly, hands linked between their horses. The world seemed brighter. The sky seemed bluer. Everything seemed possible. That evening at dinner, Edward announced that they would be hosting a ball. Eleanor nearly dropped her fork. "A ball?" "Yes. It's time we properly introduced you to society as my wife. And I find I want to show you off." "Edward, I don't know how to. I'm not good at social things. I'm not like—" "You're not like Catherine," he finished gently. "That's exactly why this will be perfect. You are genuine and kind. People will love you." Eleanor wasn't so sure, but she couldn't deny him, not when he looked at her with such pride and affection. So she agreed. Plans were made. Invitations were sent. The manor buzzed with preparations. The night of the ball arrived too quickly. Eleanor stood in her chambers, staring at herself in the mirror. Hannah had worked magic with her hair, piling it in elegant curls. The dress was new, ordered specially from London. It was a deep emerald green that made her eyes look brighter. Pearls adorned her neck, a gift from Edward. She looked different. Not beautiful, perhaps, but not plain either. Not invisible. A knock sounded. Edward entered, and his expression made her breath catch. He stared at her like he'd never seen her before, like she was a masterpiece in a gallery. "Eleanor," he breathed, "you look—" "I know I'm not." "Stunning," he interrupted. "You look absolutely stunning." He crossed to her and took her hands. He kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. Every man in that ballroom is going to envy me tonight. Eleanor wanted to protest, but his certainty made her feel like maybe, just maybe, it was true. They walked downstairs together. The ballroom glittered with candles. Guests were already arriving. Eleanor's stomach churned with nerves. But Edward kept her hand tucked in his arm. He introduced her to everyone with obvious pride. He didn't leave her side. When the dancing began, he led her onto the floor first. Eleanor had learned to dance as a girl, but she'd never been asked to dance at a ball before. She'd always sat with the other wallflowers, watching her stepsisters twirl with handsome partners. Now she was the one twirling. Edward held her close, closer than was strictly proper. He smiled down at her like no one else existed. Other couples faded into the background. There was only Edward's hand on her waist, his eyes on her face, the music swelling around them. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered. "For what?" "For making me feel like Cinderella at the ball." Edward's expression softened. "Eleanor, you're not Cinderella. You're not going to disappear at midnight. You're my wife, my countess, my love, and this is just the beginning." The ball was a success. Eleanor found herself laughing and talking with guests. Many commented on what a lovely couple they made. Some remarked on the obvious affection between them. Eleanor overheard one elderly duchess say to another, "The Earl is a changed man. Love has done him good." But not everyone was pleased. Near midnight, Eleanor excused herself to get some air. She stepped onto the terrace, breathing in the cool night. The garden stretched out before her, illuminated by paper lanterns. "So you're the new Lady Ashworth." Eleanor turned. A woman stood in the shadows. She was tall and elegant, with golden hair and sharp blue eyes. Something about her made Eleanor's skin prickle. "Yes," Eleanor said carefully. "And you are?" "Lady Victoria Hartwell. I was very close to the late Lady Ashworth. Catherine was my dearest friend." Victoria stepped into the light. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I must say, you're not what I expected." "Oh?" Catherine was exquisite, a true beauty. The Earl was madly in love with her. Victoria's tone was sweet, but her words were poison. I suppose after such perfection, he decided to try something different. Eleanor felt the old shame creeping back. The old voices that said she was plain and worthless. But then she heard Edward's voice in her head. "You are beautiful in the way that matters." "Catherine is gone," Eleanor said quietly but firmly. "I'm sorry for that loss, but I am Edward's wife now, and we are happy." Victoria's eyes flashed. "Happy? He's settling you, poor dear. Can't you see that? He married you because society demanded it, because he needs an heir. But he'll never love you the way he loved her. How could he?" Each word was a dagger. Eleanor felt them hit their mark. Doubt crept in. Was Victoria right? Was she just fooling herself? Edward had loved his first wife. He had married her for love. He had married Eleanor for convenience. Had anything really changed? "I see I've struck a nerve," Victoria purred. "Don't feel too badly. Many men keep mistresses or find their pleasures elsewhere when their wives are inadequate. I'm sure Edward will be discreet." "That's enough." Edward's voice cut through the night like a blade. He strode onto the terrace, his face dark with fury. He moved to Eleanor's side and wrapped an arm around her waist. The gesture was possessive and protective. "Lord Ashworth," Victoria said smoothly, "I was just getting to know your new bride." "By insulting her?" Edward's voice was ice. "By trying to make her doubt herself and me. I thought you were Catherine's friend, Victoria, but Catherine would never have approved of such cruelty. Victoria's composure cracked. Catherine told me how she suffered, how lonely she was, how you buried yourself in your grief and your work. She was right, Edward said. His voice gentled. I failed, Catherine. I know that. We were wrong for each other from the start, but I didn't know how to make it right. That guilt is something I'll carry forever. He turned to Eleanor. His expression was raw and open. But Eleanor is different. What I have with Eleanor is different. I don't love her because I need an heir or because society demands it. I love her because she is kind and strong and genuine. I love her because when I'm with her, I'm the man I always wanted to be. She doesn't make me forget, Catherine. She makes me grateful. I survived the grief so I could find real love. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Edward cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the drops that fell. You are not second best, he said fiercely. You are not a substitute. You are the love of my life, Eleanor. The only woman I want. The only woman I will ever want. Then he kissed her. Right there on the terrace in front of Victoria and anyone else who might be watching, he kissed her like she was air, and he was drowning, like she was the sun, and he had been lost in darkness. When he pulled back, Victoria was gone. Eleanor didn't care. She clung to Edward, her heart too full for words. I love you, she whispered. I love you so much it scares me. Don't be scared, he said. I've got you. I'll always have you. They went back inside together. The ball continued, but Eleanor barely noticed. All she could think about was Edward's declaration. All she could feel was the solid weight of his arm around her. All she could see was the future stretching ahead of them, bright with possibility. When the last guests finally left, the sky was growing pale with dawn. Eleanor stood in the entrance hall, exhausted but happy. Edward came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. He kissed her temple. Come with me, he said. He led her not to her chambers, but to his. Eleanor's heart pounded. She had never been in his private rooms before. They were warm and masculine, with dark wood furniture and a massive bed. A fire burned in the hearth. Edward turned to face her. Eleanor, I know we've been living as strangers, but I don't want that anymore. I want you as my wife in every way, but only if you want that too. Only if you're ready. Eleanor thought about all the lonely nights she'd spent in her own bed, all the times she'd wondered if Edward would ever want her. Now he stood before her, offering everything she'd dreamed of. How could she refuse? I'm ready, she said. I've been ready. Edward's smile was tender. He kissed her softly, then deeper. His hands were gentle as they unlaced her gown. Eleanor's hands shook as she unbuttoned his waistcoat. They undressed each other, slowly, learning the landscape of each other's bodies. When they finally came together, it was with love and laughter and whispered promises. Afterwards, Eleanor lay in Edward's arms, her head on his chest, his heart beat steady beneath her ear. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. I never thought I'd be happy, she confessed. I never thought anyone would love me. Then we have that in common, Edward said. I never thought I'd love again, but Eleanor, you've given me more than love. You've given me hope. You've given me joy. You've given me a reason to wake up eager for each day. She tilted her head back to look at him. You've given me all that too, and something else. What's that? You've made me believe I'm worth loving. For the first time in my life, I feel beautiful. Not because of how I look, but because of how you look at me. Edward kissed her forehead. Then I'll keep looking at you that way every day for the rest of our lives. They fell asleep, tangled together. When Eleanor woke, Golden sunlight streamed through the windows. Edward was already awake, propped on one elbow watching her. His hair was tousled, his smile was soft. "Good morning, wife," he said. "Good morning, husband," she replied. They stayed in bed, late that morning, talking and touching and marveling at the miracle they'd found. Eventually, hunger drove them to dress. They went down to the breakfast room hand in hand. Mrs. Roberts smiled knowingly when she served them. Hannah winked at Eleanor when she passed through the hall. The servants all knew, the whole household could probably feel the shift. The manor itself seemed brighter, as if love had chased away the shadows that had lingered for so long. Over the following weeks, Eleanor and Edward fell into new rhythms. They woke in the same bed every morning. They took breakfast together. They walked to gardens. They rode out to visit tenants. They read together in the evenings, sitting close on the sofa in the library. They talked about everything. They laughed often. Edward began teaching Eleanor about estate management in earnest. He valued her opinions. He implemented her suggestions. They worked together as true partners. The tenants prospered under their joint care. The estate flourished. But happiness attracts trouble, the way light attracts moths. One afternoon, a carriage arrived unannounced. Eleanor was in the garden when Hannah came running out. "My lady, your family has arrived." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She looked down at her dirt-stained hands. She'd been planting roses. She felt happy and content. She wasn't ready for her family's poison. But duty demanded. She faced them. She washed her hands and changed her dress. She walked into the drawing room with her head high. Her stepmother sat primly on the sofa. Catherine and Sophia flanked her like matching bookends. They all turned to stare at Eleanor. "Well," Lady Pemberton said, her voice dripping false sweetness, "look at you, playing lady of the manor. How quaint." "Stepmother," Eleanor said coolly, "this is unexpected. You might have written first." "We're family," Catherine said with a smirk. "Surely we don't need an invitation." "Of course," Sophia added, looking around the room with greedy eyes. "Though I must say, Eleanor, you've landed in quite a comfortable situation. The Earl must be very generous." "Edward is my husband," Eleanor said, "and yes, he is generous in all things." Lady Pemberton's eyes narrowed. "Your father is facing some financial difficulties. We thought perhaps you might speak to the Earl. A small loan to family wouldn't be too much to ask." Ah, there it was. They hadn't come to see her. They'd come for money. Eleanor should have known. She felt anger rising, but kept her voice level. "I will discuss it with Edward." "You mean he actually listens to you?" Sophia laughed. "How novel. Most husbands don't waste time on their wives' opinions." "Edward values my opinions," Eleanor said firmly. "He values me." Catherine rolled her eyes. "Please. He married you for convenience. Don't pretend it's some grand love story." "Actually, it is." Edward's voice came from the doorway. All four women turned. He stood there, looking every inch the Earl. His expression was polite, but his eyes were hard as stone. He walked directly to Eleanor and took her hand, raising it to his lips. "Lady Pemberton, Miss Pemberton, Miss Sophia." He nodded to each in turn. "What brings you to Ashworth Manor?" "We came to visit dear Eleanor," Lady Pemberton said, "and to seek your assistance with a small matter." "Assistance?" Edward's tone was pleasant, but Eleanor felt the tension in his hand. "My husband has some debts." "Nothing major, but—" "No," Edward said simply. Lady Pemberton blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no. I will not help a man who treated my wife with such cruelty. I will not give money to a family that made her feel worthless." "How dare you?" Catherine began. "How dare I?" Edward's voice remained quiet. but there was steel beneath. "How dare you? All of you. Eleanor has told me everything. The mockery, the isolation, the systematic destruction of her confidence. You made her believe she was nothing, but she is everything. She is worth 10 of any of you." Sophia's face flushed red. "She's plain and dull, she always has been. She is beautiful," Edward said, "in ways you will never understand. She has more kindness in her smallest finger than you have in your entire being. She is intelligent and capable and strong. She runs this estate with skill and grace. She is loved by our servants and tenants, and most importantly, she is loved by me." He put his arm around Eleanor's waist and pulled her close. Eleanor felt tears prickling her eyes, but they were happy tears. "You were all fools to overlook her," Edward continued, "but I'm grateful you did, because your cruelty brought her to me, and she has made my life worth living again." Lady Pemberton stood abruptly. "Well, I see we're not welcome here." "No," Edward agreed. "You're not. I will ask you to leave now and not return. If Lord Pemberton wishes to reach out directly, I may consider some assistance, but it will not be a gift. It will be a loan with clear terms, and Eleanor will have no part in the arrangement. She owes you nothing. She never did." The three women swept out in indignant silence. A footman showed them to their carriage. Eleanor stood frozen until she heard the wheels crunching down the drive. Then she turned and buried her face in Edward's chest. He held her tight. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I should have asked before throwing them out, but I couldn't bear the way they spoke to you, the way they looked at you." "Don't apologize," Eleanor said, her voice muffled against his coat. That was the most wonderful thing anyone has ever done for me." She pulled back to look at him. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. "You defended me. You chose me over their money. You called me beautiful in front of them." "I meant every word," Edward said. "You are beautiful, Eleanor. You are extraordinary, and I will defend you with my last breath." She kissed him, poured all her love and gratitude into that kiss. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Take me upstairs," Eleanor whispered. Edward's eyes darkened with desire. With pleasure, he swept her into his arms and carried her up the grand staircase. Eleanor laughed, feeling light as air. Behind them, Mrs. Roberts smiled and shooed the curious servants back to their work. That night, as they lay tangled together once again, Eleanor felt complete. She had found love where she least expected it. She had found home in a stranger's arms. She had found herself in Edward's eyes. "Edward," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, love. Do you ever regret marrying me?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Every day." Eleanor's heart dropped. But before she could pull away, he continued, "I regret that I didn't marry you sooner. I regret every day before you came into my life. I regret all the time I wasted keeping you at a distance. But the marriage itself, loving you, Eleanor, that's the best decision I've ever made." She relaxed against him. "I regret things too." "What?" "I regret believing what they said about me for so long. I regret not seeing my own worth. I regret that I didn't fight for myself sooner." "But you fought for me," Edward said. "That night when I fell, when you bandaged my wounds, you fought for me when I was broken. You saved me, Eleanor." "We saved each other," she said softly. "Yes," he agreed, "we did." Months passed in blissful happiness. Spring turned to summer. The roses bloomed more beautifully than ever. Eleanor's garden became famous throughout the county. People came from miles around to see it. But Eleanor knew the real beauty wasn't in the flowers. It was in the love she and Edward had built. That love bore fruit in the most precious way. One morning, Eleanor woke feeling queasy. Hannah helped her dress and noticed the signs immediately. "My lady, I think you should see a doctor." The doctor confirmed what Eleanor already suspected. She was with child. She would give Edward the heir he needed. But more than that, she would give them both a family. The child they both wanted desperately. She told Edward that evening in the library. He was reading correspondence. She walked up behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "I have news. Good news, I hope. The best." She came around to stand in front of him. She took his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Edward's face transformed. Joy, wonder, and fear all flickered across his features. His eyes filled with tears. "Eleanor, are you certain?" The doctor confirmed it today. He stood abruptly and pulled her into his arms. He held her so tight she could barely breathe. His whole body shook. When he pulled back, tears streamed down his face. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know," she said. "I am too. But Edward, we have something your first marriage didn't. We have real love. We have partnership. We have each other. We'll face this together." "Together," he repeated. He placed his hand on her stomach again. "I love you. Both of you. We love you too." The pregnancy was healthy. Eleanor bloomed with it. Edward was endlessly attentive, sometimes comically so. He wouldn't let her lift anything heavy. He insisted she rest every afternoon. He read to her in the evenings, one hand always on her growing belly. As her body changed, Eleanor sometimes struggled with her old insecurities. One night, looking at herself in the mirror, she frowned at her reflection. Her stomach was round. Her face was fuller. She felt ungainly. Edward came up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her, his hands covering hers on her belly. "What are you thinking?" "I look like a whale," she said glumly. "You look like a goddess," he countered. "You're growing our child. You've never been more beautiful to me. You have to say that. You're my husband." "I say it because it's true." He turned her to face him. "Eleanor, you gave me back my life. You gave me love and joy and hope. Now you're giving me a family. You are the most beautiful woman in the world to me. You always will be." She believed him. How could she not? His love shone from his eyes. His devotion surrounded her like a warm blanket. She was the luckiest woman alive. When her time came, Edward refused to leave. It wasn't done for husbands to be present, but he wouldn't budge. He held her hand through every pain. He whispered encouragement when she wanted to give up. And when their daughter finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Edward wept openly. The midwife placed the baby in Eleanor's arms. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, rosebud lips, dark hair like her father. Eleanor looked up at Edward through happy tears. "We did it. You did it," he said. "My brave, strong, magnificent wife." They named their daughter Catherine Rose. Catherine for Edward's first wife and lost son, honoring the past. Rose for Eleanor's beloved garden and their hopeful future. Baby Catherine thrived. She was a happy, healthy child who had her mother's kindness and her father's smile. Ashworth Manor rang with laughter now. Eleanor's life was full. She had a husband who adored her. She had a daughter who delighted her. She had a home where she belonged. She had finally found everything she'd never dared to dream of. One evening, when Catherine was 6 months old, Eleanor and Edward sat in the garden. The baby slept in Eleanor's arms. The sun was setting, painting the sky pink and gold. Edward's arm was around Eleanor's shoulders. They watched their daughter's peaceful face. "Do you remember the night I fell from my horse?" Edward asked. "Of course, how could I forget? You bandaged my wounds with such tender care. I had never felt anything like it. My wife never touched me like that," I said. He paused. "I think that was the moment I started falling in love with you. You showed me what real care felt like, what real love could be." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. "I fell in love with you that night too, when you trusted me with your pain. When you let me see your vulnerability, that's when I knew you were different from what I'd expected. We were both broken," Edward said, "but we healed each other." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, "we did." Little Catherine stirred in her sleep and made a soft sound. Both parents looked down at her with matching expressions of wonder. She was the proof of their love, the symbol of their healing, the promise of their future. "I love you, Eleanor," Edward said, "more than words can express." "I love you too," she replied. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for teaching me to see," he said. "Thank you for showing me that love isn't about perfection, it's about truth. It's about two imperfect people choosing each other every single day." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the three of them sat together, a family. Not perfect, but perfect for each other. Eleanor thought back to the girl she had been, the one who believed she was worthless, the one who thought no one would ever love her. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, a woman who was loved and valued, a woman who had found her happy ending. But it wasn't really an ending, Eleanor realized. It was a beginning. The beginning of a lifetime of love and partnership. The beginning of watching their daughter grow. The beginning of building a legacy of kindness and compassion. The beginning of everything good. Edward kissed her temple. Catherine sighed in her sleep, and Eleanor smiled, knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because of fate or duty, but because of love, real, honest, transformative love. The kind of love that heals wounds. The kind of love that sees past scars to the beauty beneath. The kind of love that Eleanor had bandaged into Edward's shoulder that stormy night, and that Edward had reflected back to her every day since. "My wife never touched me like this," he had said. And those words had changed everything. Those words had opened a door to a future neither of them had imagined possible. Those words had been the beginning of their fairy tale. And like all the best fairy tales, this one ended with true love conquering all, with the wallflower becoming a queen, with the grieving widower becoming a joyful husband and father, with two broken souls becoming whole. As Eleanor carried their daughter inside for the night, Edward's hand warm in hers, she knew that every painful moment of her past had been worth it, because those moments had led her here, to this man, to this child, to this love. And that was the greatest gift of all.